The rain was so heavy that night it blurred the road into a gray river. Every sensible driver had already pulled over or turned back, but I kept going because I had nothing waiting for me at home except silence. Then, through the sheets of rain, I saw a young woman standing alone on the shoulder of the highway beside a small suitcase. Her dress was soaked, her hands were shaking, and the look in her eyes wasn't fear of the storm, it was the hopelessness of someone who believed no one would ever stop. I almost kept driving. I almost became another pair of headlights that disappeared into the darkness. But something deep inside me whispered that if I left her there, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I had no idea that a single act of kindness would completely rewrite the story of my own life. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still has the power to change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Dot. Your support helps us share more stories that remind the world compassion still exists. My name is Daniel Brooks. I was 42 years old and drove long-haul trucks across the country. People often imagine truck drivers as tough men who enjoyed the endless highways, but the truth was very different. The road had become my escape after losing my wife, Sarah, to cancer 3 years earlier. Since then, every mile I drove was another attempt to outrun memories that refused to stay behind. Our small farmhouse felt empty without her laughter, so I volunteered for every extra delivery I could find. The highways became my home, and loneliness became my only passenger. That evening I had been hauling construction equipment through endless rain. Visibility was terrible, and I was exhausted after nearly 10 hours behind the wheel. When I noticed the young woman standing alone beside the road, my first instinct was caution. Stories about roadside scams had made every driver suspicious. But then I looked closer. Her suitcase was old and worn. She hugged herself against the cold, and tears mixed with the rain on her face. She looked no older than 24, completely defeated by life. I slowed the truck and pulled onto the shoulder. She hesitated before walking toward me, almost as if she couldn't believe someone had actually stopped. Her name was Grace Carter. She thanked me with trembling lips and climbed into the warm cab, wrapping herself in an old blanket I kept behind the seat. For several miles she simply stared through the windshield while rain pounded against the glass. She carried a sadness so heavy that words seemed impossible. Eventually she began sharing pieces of her story. She had left an abusive relationship that afternoon with nothing except her suitcase and a few dollars. Her phone battery had died, buses had stopped running because of the storm, and every car had driven past without stopping. She admitted that after hours in the rain she had started believing she might never make it through the night. She wasn't asking for money or miracles. She simply wanted a safe place to survive until morning. Something about her honesty reminded me of Sarah. My wife had always believed people deserved compassion before judgment. She often said that the greatest gift you could give someone was making them feel they weren't alone. As Grace quietly cried into the blanket, I realized Sarah would never have driven past her. Neither could I. I found a small roadside motel where I rented her a room for the night. Before leaving, I bought her a warm meal from a nearby diner and left enough money for breakfast. She cried harder than before, not because of the food or the room, but because someone had treated her like her life mattered. Before I returned to my truck, she thanked me with a smile that looked fragile but genuine, the first hopeful expression I'd seen on her face. I continued my delivery, believing that would be the end of our story. Yet for weeks afterward I couldn't stop wondering whether she was safe. Then, nearly 2 months later, I found a handwritten letter waiting in my mailbox when I returned home. Grace explained that my kindness had saved far more than one terrible night. Because she had reached the city safely, she had been able to contact an aunt she hadn't spoken to in years. Her aunt welcomed her into her home, helped her find counseling, and encouraged her to finish the nursing degree she had abandoned. She wrote that the night I stopped my truck had become the turning point of her entire life. The letter included one sentence that I read over and over again. It said that when everyone else kept driving, I reminded her that humanity still existed, and because of that, she decided not to give up on herself. Those words changed something inside me. For years after Sarah died, I had believed my life no longer had purpose beyond paying bills and surviving another day. But Grace's letter showed me that even broken people could still become the answer to someone else's prayer. Instead of burying myself in work, I started volunteering at a community shelter whenever I returned from trips. I helped repair broken vehicles for struggling families without charging them. I delivered donated furniture to elderly neighbors. Every small act reminded me that healing doesn't always come from receiving kindness. Sometimes it comes from giving it away. Months turned into years. One winter afternoon I suffered a massive heart attack while unloading freight at a warehouse. Everything happened so quickly that I barely remembered collapsing onto the cold pavement. The next clear memory I had was opening my eyes in a hospital intensive care unit. Standing beside my bed was a nurse whose face looked strangely familiar. It was Grace. She had completed nursing school with honors. Out of all the hospitals in the state, she happened to be working the emergency shift when the ambulance brought me in. She had recognized me immediately despite the passing years. The doctors later explained that every minute had mattered. Grace had helped coordinate my emergency treatment the moment I arrived. Her quick actions gave me the best possible chance of surviving. As I slowly recovered, we talked for hours. She confessed that she had carried my old blanket through nursing school as a reminder never to lose faith in people. I admitted that her letter had rescued me from a different kind of loneliness. We both realized that neither of us had truly saved the other. One simple decision beside a rainy highway had rescued us both in different ways. After my recovery, our friendship continued growing. Grace eventually married a kind teacher named Michael, and they invited me to their wedding. I stood proudly in the front row, feeling less like a guest and more like family. Years later, when their first daughter was born, they surprised me by giving her the middle name Sarah, in honor of the woman whose kindness had inspired mine. Sometimes people ask whether I was afraid to stop that rainy night. The honest answer is yes. Kindness often requires courage because you never know how your story will unfold. Yet every meaningful chapter of my life began with a choice that fear almost prevented. Now whenever I drive that same highway and storms begin covering the road, I remember the lonely young woman standing beside her suitcase, believing no one cared whether she lived or died. I also remember that none of us truly knows what burden another person is carrying. The smallest act of compassion can become the beginning of someone else's miracle, even when we never expect anything in return. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Dot. Your support allows these stories of kindness to reach people who may be searching for a reason to keep believing. Special request, before this story ends, please comment below with one simple sentence: one act of kindness can change a life. We'd love to read your thoughts and hear about a moment when kindness made a difference in your own life. Life rarely changes because of grand gestures. More often, it changes because one ordinary person chooses compassion when everyone else chooses convenience. On a cold, rainy night, I thought I was simply offering a stranger a ride. Instead, I discovered that kindness always travels in two directions. Sometimes the life you save with one small decision becomes the very life that saves yours when you need it most. And that is why I will never drive past someone in need again.